Allison, I think we can start.
Yes, yes. I'm just really overwhelmed with the number of people coming in right now. So, all right. A very good morning to everyone. Before I proceed, let me just introduce myself quickly. I am Alison Atis, and I will be your MC for today's session. So, just a quick set of house rules and etiquette reminders for today's session. For the Zoom participants, of course, please, let's just all keep in mind, together with the FB Live participants, let's keep in mind all the FB and Zoom etiquettes to help ensure that the masterclass will run smoothly. So for Zoom participants, please make sure that your audio is on mute and your video is turned off once you enter the meeting room. You may use the Zoom chat box or the Q&A function to ask questions to the speaker. Your questions will then be answered shortly. You may also use the raise your hand function. Once acknowledged by the moderator, you may unmute yourself, turn your camera on, provide a quick intro, then ask your question. A participant is entitled to asking one relevant question to foster a collaborative atmosphere for today. So you are expected to stay in the Zoom room for the Zoom participants until after the group photo op. For the FB Live participants, you may write your questions on the comment section. Select PACMRI members will monitor the space to ensure that relevant questions will be asked by the moderator during the open forum. Of course, for everyone, be very mindful, be very respectful. So before we proceed to the masterclass session, I would like to give the Zoom floor to our president, Professor Maria Rosell, or as we fondly call her, Professor Chen San Pascual, to deliver the opening remarks.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning, magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Welcome to the third session of this year's PACMRI Masterclass series. Let me first introduce PACMRI to our first-timers here. Kaway-kaway sa mga first-timers. PACMRI, or the Philippine Association for Communication and Media Research Incorporated, is a University of the Philippines-based non-stock organization that aims to advance knowledge in communication and media phenomena involving the Filipinos and the Philippines. Founded in 2019, we're that young, by the University of the Philippines Department of Communication Research, PACMRI envisions a knowledge-based society that values, uses, and innovates communication and media research. PACMRI endeavors to promote the systematic study of developments, changes, and challenges in Philippine communication and media to contribute to enhancing the competencies of local communication and media researchers in conducting and disseminating scholarly works, and to facilitate the engagement of communication and media research practitioners and institutions in Philippine society. The PACMRI Masterclass series, one of our flagship projects, aims to expound on the various philosophical, contextual, and practical concerns that inform and elevate the studies that we conduct. We at PACMRI hope that the series results in a vibrant and rigorous communication and media research culture in our country. This morning's session is a continuation of the highly engaging session that we had last September 13 with Dr. Iris Brillon, wherein Dr. Iris generously shared with us their insights and experiences as a Filipino scholar of popular and fandom cultures. Our 1-hour session last September was certainly not enough, and this morning, Dr. Iris will be facilitating the extension of our conversation on participatory and popular culture. I know that you yourselves are fans of our resource speaker, and I am certain that you're all excited to join in this morning's conversation. Also, this morning's masterclass session is PACMRI's first collaboration with the University of the Philippines Los Baños General Education Cluster on Communication. Please join me in welcoming our colleagues and students from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Magandang umaga sa inyo. We also appreciate the participants who have joined us in the Zoom room and through our Facebook live streaming. please inform your colleagues and friends that all our online masterclass sessions are available in PACMRI's digital platforms. And these are accessible for free. You are all welcome to view and to share our content. Mabuhay ang pananaliksik at mga mananaliksik ng komunikasyon at media. Let us all have an engaging morning. Thank you. Magandang umaga.
Yay, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor San Pascual. So before we proceed to the lecture and the intro, I would like to call on Assistant Professor Trina Lea T. Mendoza from the UPLB College of Development Communication to give us a welcome message on behalf of our event collaborator today, the UPLB Com10 General Education Cluster.
Hello, good morning. Thank you very much, Allison, and good morning to everyone, to Dr. Henry Jenkins, good morning, and to our colleagues at PACMRI. So I'd like to share very briefly that GE Conversations is an avenue for GE students to learn about GE concepts or general education concepts outside the classroom. So the Com10 cluster of UP Los Baños, which is composed of faculty from the College of Arts and Sciences, Department of Humanities, and the College of Development Communication. We're all very thankful to PACMRI for collaborating with us in order to invite our Com10 students to attend your master classes and participate and learn from communication and media experts. So we hope our Com10 students right now will appreciate and participate in this session and incoming session. So we look forward to future exciting GE conversations with PACMRI's master classes. So thank you very much. Back to you, Allison. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctrina. So, and with that, of course, I'm very sure that you are all excited to listen to our guest speaker for today, aside from fangirling and fanboying and fanfolking, whatever. So, very quickly, let me introduce our guest speaker. So, he is the Provost Professor of Communication, Journalism, Cinematic Arts, and Education at the University of Southern California. He is the author and editor of 20 books on various aspects of media and popular culture. So among his best-known works are Textual Poachers, Television Fans, and Participatory Culture, Convergence Culture, Where Old and New Media Collide, Spreadable Media, Creating Meaning and Value in a Network Culture, By Any Media Necessary, The New Youth Activists, Popular Culture and the Civic Imagination, Case Studies of Creative Social Change, and of course, comics and stuff. Dr. Jenkins came to USC after 20 years as a faculty member at MIT, where he created and co-chaired the Comparative Media Studies Master's Program and launched an innovative agenda of public-facing scholarship concerning new media literacies, educational and innovative gaming, convergence culture, and civic media. A central theme of this scholarship concerns the ways that everyday people learn, work, create, and advocate in a context where more people have the capacity to create, curate, and circulate media content. This concern has taken him from an early focus on media fans and audiences through to work on the ways participatory culture impacts education, business, and more recently, politics. He leads the Civic Paths Research Group funded by the MacArthur Foundation, which experiments with new ways of enhancing civic engagement and fostering the civic imagination. He has a long-standing commitment to increase public access and awareness of communication, media studies, and cultural studies research. In the service of that mission, Dr. Jenkins co-hosts the podcast How Do You Like It So Far with ASCJ faculty member Colin McClay and has run his widely read blog, Confessions of an Aca-Fan, for more than 15 years. So without further ado, everyone, Dr. Henry Jenkins.
Hello, good morning, Philippines. So excited to be sharing some time with you today. I apologize to anyone who showed up a few weeks ago for a false start on this miscommunication, but we're excited to be with you today. So I'm going to be talking today about transcultural fandom in East Asia, the concept of imaginary homelands, a little bit less than this title indicates, about sartorial fandom and fan nationalism. And as once I'm done, I'm happy to do an Ask Anything round questions about any aspect of fandom studies that interest you. This is just to get us juices rolling, to get you thinking about some of the implications this might have for work in Asia on fandom. And so that's me from the summer in Seoul, in the Gangnam district, sort of rocking out on K-pop and trying to better understand what K-pop culture looks like on the ground. This talk is going to be a bit of a theoretical travelogue, and you'll see some more pictures from my trips. I went to Shanghai, I went to Seoul this summer, and you're going to see some of what I discovered while I was there. All right, go to the next slide. So the first thing I wanted to note is that I may be 20 books now. By next February, it'll be 21 or more likely 24. I've got 15 books coming out over the next 2 years because I launched a project with my colleague, Robert Kosnetz, on who I co-teach a course called Fan Relations with. He's one of the fathers of consumer culture research. I'm seen as a founder, I won't say the father. No one wants to be a patriarch of a mostly feminist field, but I'm one of the founding figures in fandom studies. And together we're writing a series of short books, 100, 150-page books on various aspects of the intersection of our bodies of work. And that started out as a textbook. Then we said, what if we published each chapter separately so that students and teachers can only buy the things they need? And then we realized we need a book, something like 100 pages per chapter, in which case it's starting to look like a lot of these short book introductions that people are publishing these days. So we expect later this fall to have the first 3 start to come out. And this is up here both because it's a cool picture and captures something of what K-pop looks like to me, but it's also, I think, in contention right now. We haven't resolved what's going to be on the cover of the first volume, but this one is apt to be a picture that's used in one of our volumes down the line. All right, next slide. So in summer 2 years ago, I went to teach a course on Western fandom studies at Shanghai University. And I went not sure what this was going to mean for me other than repaying a favor. I had done a favor for a colleague there. The colleague wanted me to come and, hosted me there in Shanghai. But by the time this trip was over, I was there 7 weeks. I had fallen in love, seriously in love with Shanghai fan culture. And through that lens, started to better understand what fandom looks like in Asia more generally, but especially East Asia. So when I came home, I started a research group at USC that was going to focus on transcultural fandom studies with a strong focus on East Asian fandoms, and didn't know who would show up. The first meeting, we had 40 people show up, PhDs from across 5 different schools at USC. By this point, we have 100 people, both from China and from the US, who were working together on writing initiatives. So we have 12 groups writing about different aspects of fandom right now, and we have 2 special issues lined up and a book plan down the line. And so it's just building momentum. We meet every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time, which turns out to be a good time. It's morning there in Shanghai, and so we're able to bring it in. Next summer, I'm going to be teaching in a summer program in Seoul and in one of the Japanese cities still to be determined, and it'll be a program on pop culture studies and with a strong emphasis on East Asian pop cultures. And I'm just in for the next phase of my career. And we'll be looking for students. I make sure your folks here know about it once we have some materials to share, but we'd love to meet some of you there if I can't meet you some other way. So that's where we're at. This past summer, I brought 6 USC students to Hong Kong and Shanghai. We were able to join up with students who've been participating in our research group from afar in those 2 cities. And we rented a bus and toured fan sites in China for about 2 weeks. And it was an amazing experience. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So what do I mean by transcultural fandom? Well, my understanding of it comes from Bertha Chen, Lori Morimoto. Much of that research has focused on Asia and the context of Asia. But what they're arguing is that rather than thinking transnational, that is, the media, maybe nation states aren't the best way to think about how we organize the study of fandom, because we're in a moment where there's all kinds of cultural exchanges of fan interest across national borders. And they talk about access and affinity. So we have access to more of each other's pop culture now than ever before. And that brings out these affinities, these connections people feel to each other's cultures. So in theory, transcultural fandom could operate within a single nation. Suppose I'm interested in indigenous people's culture in the US. Many of those indigenous groups, nations, have their own sovereignty and run their own nations within US borders. So if I was interested in Navajo pop culture as a white American, I would already be in a transcultural fandom. The Asian American identity in the US is a coalition identity. It brings Filipinos or alongside Chinese and Japanese and Indians and anyone from Asia essentially can lay claim to an Asian American identity. And that's resulting in all kinds of mixes of cultural identities here that may feel very different than the ways those cultures relate to each other in the nationally defined context of Asia. But what drew me to this was seeing how many of the Chinese fans I met were fans of anime and manga from Japan, were fans of K-pop and Hallyu from Korea, were consuming music from other places in the region, and were interested in Disney. Well, I think Americanness has been reduced to Disney by Disney's gobbling up such a large share of our collective imagination. But and we'll see glimpses of Disney stuff running through this presentation. So this idea of transcultural fandom animates us. Let's see if we can figure out what's the impact of all of the change and the global circulation of media and pop culture that we're seeing at the present moment. Next slide. I'd written about this idea almost 20 years ago in an article I published on pop cosmopolitanism. The idea there is that, if all over the world, we're seeing people who are seeking to escape the parochialism of their own cultures by seeking out pop culture elsewhere, right? At the time, I was talking mostly about Japanese cool and the American market, but I was making the argument that 2 groups come together to support this kind of transcultural fandom. One are the fans and the other are the immigrants, right? So immigrants, when maintaining ethnic centers in major American cities, create a marketplace where we could buy and trade pop culture from somewhere else. We don't need those marketplaces as much now as we did when I wrote the article, but they're still very active, and it creates a point of contact between immigrant populations and, people who grew up here, but who are seeking difference. So when we think about traditional cosmopolitanism, we're seeking, let's say, art movies from somewhere else. It's always was defined in terms of high culture. But today, pop culture is the thing that draws people together. If you go to a nurse hospital, I'm sorry? If we go to a nursery
Bigay ko
school,
na lang nasa ilalim mga cards. Ako po isang kanin.
I'm hearing a voice, and if they're asking me, it's in a language, in language I don't understand. So I'll just keep going. So that, if today, if you go to a nursery school anywhere in the world, they're probably drawing characters that look like anime characters or manga characters, that people are listening to music from Korea. We're watching Squid Game and so forth. Those exchanges are taking place through pop culture, which is enabling us to form bridges across national boundaries, just like we are now, right? Okay, next slide. So another theory that I've been drawn to lately of kind of transculturalism is this work of Ing-Yu Oh, who writes about female universalism. And he's arguing that if you look worldwide, the fandom for Korean popular culture becomes overwhelmingly female. And it's because the dramas speak to the kind of painful sides of patriarchy. They're melodramas, and they express something of it is to be a woman in a patriarchal culture. And the K-pop creates the joy, right? The place where we dance together, where they're empowered, where women are empowered to form communities with each other that cut across national lines. And that's what he means by female universalism. So those are both approaches, not incompatible approaches, but not the same approach to thinking about how transcultural fandom operates. So let's keep going. Next slide. So, and this is a concert I went to in Atlanta, Georgia, for my favorite K-pop group, which is G-Idol, which does very explicitly feminist music, but does so with enormous amount of joy and fantasy and color. It's a fantastic space you step into when you go to their concerts. Next slide. This is, I think, going to be this is from the Global K-pop Jamboree that's held in Seoul over New Year's that I was at this past year. And you just see these, the joy, the passion, the excitement of being at this massive concert that brought so many K-pop bands together. Next slide. And here we see the glow sticks, which are kind of the tribal iconography of K-pop fandom. Somewhere around here, I have my G-Idol one that I bought this summer. And I should have had it in hand, ready to flash. But you see there that just, again, what fandom looks like and the sense of entering a kind of space of enchantment, a space of solidarity, a fantastical space that's set apart from everyday life and yet somehow speaks to it, somehow allows us to repair some of the damage that everyday life does to us. It's not simply escapism, because the language of escapism invites us to ask, what are we escaping from? What are we escaping to? And what's the relationship between them? Next slide. So part of what's shaping this transcultural flow is what I call the global shuffle. So when a company like Netflix moves into a market, yes, they're transmitting American culture. And so there's still a bit of it is American cultural imperialism, but at the same time, in order to operate there, they are forming partnerships with local media producers. They have to share a certain amount of content from that market. And the economics of it is, having made that content, it doesn't make sense just to show Filipino content in the Philippines. That content gets transmitted around the world. And so there's a kind of shuffle of global pop culture that's going on that's allowing us to consume more of each other's pop culture than ever before. And that's creating a context where the connections, the formation of fandoms around global media are accelerating, they're expanding, something significant is going on there. And I see those nexus between China, Japan, and Korea as a particularly rich space for studying this. But it's abundantly clear as we start to study it, we are going to need to think about Thailand, Vietnam, and Philippines as also important parts of that circuit of exchange of media that's taking place. Okay, next slide. So our research group then are looking at different sites where we might understand those logics. So one of our group is looking at the game Genshin Impact and the construction of race, imaginary race, actual race. So this was a cosplay party we happened to be going on while we were in Shanghai doing our field trip this summer. And for the Americans, that guy who's painted his body brown was particularly shocking, right? We've been so taught that it's shameful to do brown face, black face, yellow face, red face, that had been part of the racist tradition of American media, that this is cultural appropriation. But that memo doesn't seem to be operating yet in China. And so understanding what it means for this Chinese young man to wear a blonde wig and have brown body paint is very interesting for us to think about. And so we have, in that case, a team of researchers from China, from Korea, from the US, trying to understand that relationship. Or next slide. We have another team that's very interested in the phenomenon of random K-pop random playlist dance parties, right? And this is one that happened. We happened to be seeing and observing at a mall in Shanghai, but this team of students has been going around the world observing it. Lots of this stuff gets recorded and posted online, so they've been able to collect an even larger number of videos from all over the world where people are doing it. But if you don't know what this is, you see that the mall has laid down a circle on the floor. Then they will start playing 30-second snippets from K-pop songs. If you know the dance moves for that song, you step to the center, and if you don't, you step to the fringe. There may be moments where it's only one or two people dancing. There are also other moments where everyone knows and everyone dances. It's not really a competition so much as an exhibition where they're inviting other fans in, they're showing their knowledge. And as you see, it's not exclusively women, but it's overwhelmingly women. And so it's not a couples dance. It's, women dancing with women. It creates a cover for same-sex people who want to dance together openly in China, which is a pretty homophobic culture, a dangerous place to be out and queer. But it's also, also just a space where women can dance together and feel that sense of joy and empowerment that OU is arguing comes from K-pop, in terms of female universalism. Next slide. We have others looking at exchange and how pop culture is tied into popular feminism. So, for example, there's a team in China looking at how the Barbie movie and Barbie more generally was received in China last year, and how with it came opportunities for grassroots popular feminist education efforts. Whether or not we want to read Barbie as a feminist film, it brought people together interested in gender and eager to learn more about what a positive vision, a sex positive version of feminism might look like in the Chinese context. And then that's my girls, the G Idol. And people are looking comparatively at focus groups in China and in the US about whether they're read as queer or not, and what that implications mean in the different cultural contexts. Next slide. So yes, so what I'm going to talk about now is an article that's coming out in about 6 months that I wrote coming out of my first trip to Shanghai for this research on the concept of imaginary homelands. And as you'll see, to me, it's also tied up with Pop Mart, which fascinated me when I stumbled into Pop Mart. I am now a hardcore fan of Pop Mart and Pop Mart toys. But I'm going to call this section Imaginary Homelands, Pop Mart, and Make Believe. Or I should say Make Believe. So here is a park in Shanghai where they have an 80-something foot tall Evangeline Unit 1, mostly purple, that's on active display. So as an American, I had been led to believe that this stuff was taking place mostly underground, right? That it's China is a closed society, it's all secretive. So it's when I first went here, I was really thrown by just the high visibility of this space. Well, I had discovered this space through one of my students from the Shanghai University course who'd written a paper, and he talked about this as his imaginary homeland and said he and his friends went there before they went to see an anime film in the theater or before they went to buy manga, whatever. It was their meeting up point, and it was the space where they felt most at home as fans of Japanese popular culture in a Chinese context. But he wrote about the statues. Perhaps for ordinary residents, it is just a large decoration, but for fans, it has an extraordinary value and significance of breaking through time and space limitations. And we're going to talk a bit about both time and space here. Like the remains of giants sleeping on the land, this is how I interpret it. So when we go there, there's a sense of being connected to Japan and its popular culture, and at the same time entering a fantastic space where maybe you can pretend that's a giant actual giant Evangeline robot. And it was interesting. Here we see these two young women who are in kind of subcultural costumes. There are on the other side two men who are similarly there. They've clearly gone here before, and it's part of a regular routine for them. And I wanted to try to think about what that might be about. And it became the beginnings of piecing together a number of things I experienced on this trip. Okay, next slide. So you can just get a sense of the scale of this thing. Next slide. And around it, there are smaller court of honor of other Japanese pop culture icons that are meaningful to people. Apparently, all of this was brought over for Comic-Con, and then no one wanted to ship it back, so they found a place to put it, and it's in this park, the deserted park and so forth. But all right, next slide. So for me going there, I had been part of the first generation in America to encounter Ultraman. So when I saw Ultraman, I recognized who he was, what the gesture should be, pose for a picture that I could send to my boyhood friends and so forth. So I had this experience of meeting him as someone from afar who'd been part of my culture. I hadn't thought about Ultraman in a long time, but it's suddenly here. And as I traveled through China, it was very clear Ultraman is very of the moment in China again. But so there's me with Ultraman. Okay, next. So as we started thinking about it, I wanted to go back to think about what is the relationship of culture, and particularly global culture, to notions of homelands. And I started by looking and thinking about ethnic enclaves. This is the Chinatown in downtown Los Angeles, about 4 miles from my house. And people go there for supplies, food supplies, festival materials, and to perform Chineseness for each other and for Americans. So it's a performance space, it's a supply space, it is part of what it is to be Chinese in Los Angeles. And we have our Filipino towns, and we have our Japan towns, and we have little Ethiopia, and all of these other spaces, right? And each of them function in a just slightly different way, but their shared function is to be a staging ground for ethnic identities. And they're particularly important across generations, so that if you have first-generation immigrants, they can take their second-generation children there and expose them to some aspects of the cultural tradition they come from. So this is in some ways a fantasy space. If you're second, third, fourth generation Chinese American, you probably may never have been to China. It is not your culture, but it is a culture you want to maintain connections with. Okay, so that's one model we can think about there. Next slide. And here I want to think about a relation between these three terms I have up here, right? Imagined community is Benedict Anderson's notion that all communities are in some sense imagined, in that we probably never know all the members who claim affiliation with that community. And he was talking particularly originally about the British Empire and Brits who were living in India, say, or Ceylon, and maintain connections back to the UK, that they feel a part of that community, even though they may not have been home for 20 years. So I'm interested in then extending it outward to imagined communities. So no one in my family really knows or feels strong connections to any old country. My family has been in America so long that we don't even know for sure. We can look at the name Jenkins and it's a bit Irish or Welsh by all likelihood, but there's no family history, there's no connection narrative, there's no emotional connection there. But so I'm drawn toward fictional affiliations. I'm a Ravenclaw, right? And so Hogwarts is not a real place, spoiler alert, but I do, every time I've been tested, ended up by whatever sorting mechanism, a Ravenclaw. And so it becomes part of my identity. As a first generation Trek fan, I'm drawn to Klingons. And a number of times in my life, in various mechanisms, I've ended up being a Klingon. So it's an imagined community. There's the space I'm entering into is a space of the imagination, but nevertheless, I feel very real connection. My identity is connected to those imaginary peoples, nevertheless. And then finally, this term imagining community, which is maybe my favorite of these, is, to me, imagined community makes it sound like a completed process, whereas in fact, it's ongoing. We're always actively imagining together the terms of our relations to other members of our community. And so in our civic imagination work, we talk often about imagining communities. Next slide. So that's one path into this question. The second is fan tourism, right? What's it like when we go someplace that's tied to our favorite show, that we know within the fiction more than we know outside it? So this is the magical world of Hogwarts, a magical wizarding world at Orlando. I was there for what was called the Night of 1,000 Wizards. By the time it ended, it was about 2,000 wizards, all hardcore fans of Harry Potter who were being let into the park for the first time as the park is first opening. And we were allowed in after midnight, and they suspended rules against costumes and so forth. So we had about a 2-hour time to just get accustomed to it. And people were literally kneeling on the ground and kissing the ground because they felt like they were coming home to something that they've never actually been to before, right? But they knew it was not even the place where the stories were filmed. It's not the place where the stories took place, but it was a place built to the proportions and the design elements from the films. And for them, this was a homecoming. So that's a kind of fan tourism. You go from where you are to someplace distant in order to have an encounter with a text that is very close to your heart. Next slide. Now, in my case, this is the Bradbury Building in downtown LA. It figures in a number of vanished texts, maybe most famously in Blade Runner. And it's literally on the end of my street. So people come from all over the world to go to the Bradbury Building to have just this brief encounter with Blade Runner. But I see it all the time walking up and down my street. It's in my neighborhood, and yet it's for someone else, they've traveled halfway across the world to get there. And that's, I think, what makes this idea of imaginary homelands interesting, because for me, I'm visiting someplace from across the world, but for my student, it's in his neighborhood. It connects and reshapes how he sees Shanghai, the city he's lived in his entire life. And so as we think about imaginary homelands, we have to think about the possibility. This is not about pilgrimage. It's about living a day every day in relation to something that reminds us of an imaginary world we would like to connect with in a more intimate way. And that's part of what interested me about his phrase, imaginary homelands. Okay, next slide. And I need to reach behind me and turn on the lights. You're not going to be able to see me. Okay, there we go. Oops. Yeah, okay. So that brings PopMart into this question, right? So PopMart is a remarkable space. It's a fantasy space. It's also a merchandise space. It's a space where people go and take their pictures because it's so cool to be in that space. And they send them through social media out, and that becomes part of the advertising campaign that feeds PopMart. For those of you who don't know, and I suspect most of you there do know, most of my American students don't, because we only have 2 PopMarts in the US, but it's a space where you buy toys and blind boxes that tie into both existing pop culture franchises, but also new franchises being launched by the company that are not yet in other media, but one could picture Molly as eventually becoming a huge media franchise someday in the way that Barbie did, right? But it's not yet. Okay, next slide. So, so again, you go there to be seen. It's most of its clientele are young women in their 20s. And it's fascinating to think about. In the US, action figures, say, are mostly young men in their teens and 20s. But this stuff has been feminized and it opened up a new market. And there are markets in China for action figures for young men, but PopMart is not that. It is a very feminine space. But they don't kick people like me out who really love the toys too. It's just percentage-wise, more women are buying them than men. Next slide. So here's Molly in various space suits. And I'm interested in the space Mollies in part because the propaganda purpose they serve of boosting support for the space program in China at a time it's at high capacity and visibility. I came back and I told my friends that China's in a space race with us. We just don't know it yet. That the US and China are clearly going to be racing each other to Mars, and we're behind because we're not paying attention to what they're doing. But if you look, I have the yellow Molly there, and the yellow Molly, if you pull its helmet down, it's a SpongeBob SquarePants figure on the outside of the helmet. And this is true of a lot of the Mollys. They wear as cosplay other media franchises, but at core, they're Chinese, right? So Molly is at core Chinese, but she may dress up like a media franchise from somewhere else. And I think that's an interesting part of this. Okay, next slide. And it's not the only space or the only company in China that is doing this. This one, Kotaki, is at least partially tied to the government-produced television in China. Here we see Empress in the Palace stuff, which I have some Empress in the Palace stuff because I'm a fan of that show. But it also does Age of Enlightenment, which we're literally, let's see if it's the next slide or not, if I cut it out. Next slide. Yeah, so there you see the vinyl figures of Mao and the founders of the Chinese Communist Revolution as they're presented to young people today through PopMart-like toys, vinyl toys. And next to them are the old school, white bust sage Mao. That was what we first experienced when China and the US first started détente under Nixon, right? So, but now it's shifted from those white plaster of Paris bust to these cool multicolored vinyl figurines that have us a hot young Mao as opposed to an old sage Mao. Okay, next. And that's not the only place. This is a pet shop I ran into at one of the malls in Shanghai, where you can handle snakes and lizards, live snakes and lizards. But that's not exciting enough. We have to have the top level of all their cases with Godzilla. So the imaginary lizard trumps the actual lizards at this pet store. And I found that really fascinating to think about. So again, the fantasy is being woven into everyday life experiences, and toys become one of the vehicles by which we experience these fantasy worlds. The toy is our token that bridges between our world and the fantasy world. It's something we can hold on to as we fantasize. Next slide. This is a Final Fantasy pop-up cafe that we encountered during my trip to China. And again, it's designed to look like some of the spaces in the game. They have foods that are modeled after foods that are in the game. And again, it's about bridging between the space of everyday life, the local mall for many of these teens, and then something else, the larger space of the fantasy world. Next slide. And there they have bulletin boards, right? Where fan artists can display their work, where fans can make connections with each other. These are literal interfaces between fans that take advantage of the shared fantasy world as a attractor that allows these social exchanges to take place. Next slide. And here's whiteboard that's in another of the malls in Shanghai where people can leave messages, draw pictures, whatever they want to do to stake out some ownership over this imaginary homeland. Okay, next slide. So, and your homeland could be as small as the screen of your phone. I was having dinner with these two charming young K-pop fans in Shanghai, and turned out one of them is a fan of boy idols, and she's a mother fan of these boy idols, and the other is a sister fan of girl crush groups. And they showed me each individually that what was on their phone, and I had them pose for a picture so we could capture this moment. And they wanted to be clear that they were close friends with each other, even though their tastes were different, even though their roles in fandom were different. They had found ways to bridge the divides that sometimes cripple fandoms over some of these different ways of relating to the content. Okay, next slide. So Bobby Schweitzer is a performance studies guy in the US, and he has a really interesting article about Disney fandom in the US and what happened during COVID when people couldn't access theme parks. They began staging the rides in their own apartments for each other, and they would take advantage of props and things, like souvenirs, costumes, of sound effects to create ride-like experiences that they recorded and shared on TikTok and YouTube and Facebook and so forth with each other. And so he talks about this in terms of this idea of make-believe. So make-believe often is just treated as a substitute for pretend in our everyday English. But for him, what he's interested in is the act of making believe, the act of staging something that enables all the participants to have not passively suspend disbelief, but to actively produce belief. It is, what do we need to do in order for us to accept for a moment that we're in a social contract that allows us to be part of Disney World, Disneyland, when it's closed and all we're seeing is someone's home. But we have that sense of nostalgia, of pleasure that's created. And I would argue part of what PopMart's in the business of doing are producing these prompts, which allow us to actively produce belief for our daydreams, right? And so one thing that interests me about PopMart toys is in the US, the action figures may have 20 or 30 points of articulation. PopMart toys have 3 or 4. They're not action figures, they're contemplation figures. They end up on your desk, in your bookcase. And during the workday or during studying, you look up and you see it, and for a few minutes, you daydream. And it's a material basis for allowing you to have a more vivid daydream. And I think that's what what Schweitzer is talking about in terms of making believe, the act of constructing the conditions which allow us to have a more vivid fantasy experience, which requires the cooperation of multiple people, right? Or of props or other materials. And he reads it through a performance studies basis. Okay, next slide. This was one of those places in the mall that I just was fascinated. This young woman showed up there. She was getting her picture taken by her friends. I snapped it, captured this, but she came there dressed like that, posed for a picture next to that backdrop. And that backdrop was put there precisely so people would pose for pictures next to it. That all of the malls I've been to in Shanghai have photo opportunities that are built into them that allow us to stage fantasies that then are spread by social media and encourage more people to come to the mall. But in terms of having a costume, in terms of a setting, she's all set up to make believe, right? And that's part of what we're talking about here. Next slide. This is the fans rented out the theater for the first Slam Dunk movie summer of 2 years ago. And they brought and passed out these red thunder making, things, thunder makers, and people clap them together during the movie. And if you've seen that film, it's one long basketball game, really, the story is. And so everyone was acting as if it was a real basketball game, as if we were really there and it was happening live in front of us and we're cheering on our teams and so forth. So it created a space of fan participation that is colored by the acts of staging a fantasy for each other that is deeply participatory in its core. Okay, next slide. What I started to discover is that in a lot of the malls in Shanghai, kids are coming home from school, changing into cosplay and coming out almost every day of the week, hanging out at the mall in cosplay costumes, blurring the boundaries between a restaurant here and anime costumes. And the malls are trying to do things like run the random K-pop dance events to draw them in because they're dropping a lot of income on the mall. They're desired customers, although some people I saw seemed to be aghast and upset these young people were doing this. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was really cool. So this is what we see here. Next slide. And there are around these malls also small table shops where fan entrepreneurs are selling the things the other fans need in order to support their fan participation. And there's plenty of great examples of that all through Shanghai. Next slide. Here's some more of these fan entrepreneurs, which is some, Angela McRobbie has talked about subcultural entrepreneurs. I see these fans as a subset of her category of subcultural entrepreneurs. So read onto this, all the things she said about it. Okay, next slide. This is a gathering at a hotel, a kind of one-off event for Otami game fans, romance game fans, and they've created settings to have their pictures taken. They sell merchandise to each other, but it's one large space of cosplay. And again, part of the everyday life of being a fan in Shanghai. Next slide. Every weekend, it seems, there are these kinds of gatherings. Next, so we see some of the women there in various costumes or various, things they bought draped over their arm. Next slide. The biggest space, though, for this kind of play in Shanghai is Shanghai Disneyland. And I talked to some of the executives there. They said they were totally unprepared for the amount of subcultural clothing and cosplay that takes place in these spaces. It's like one great Easter parade promenade, to use an old world reference, right? Where people go to see and be seen, and the pleasure is dressing up to go to Disneyland. Most Americans just strip down as far as they legally can and slather suntan oil on and go, but there you're performing an identity that makes that park feel all the more alive to you. And the pleasure of people watching is very much part of the pleasure of going to the park. Next slide. So we'll just keep flipping through some of these Disneyland things as I talk, but it just becomes this perfect space for staging photographs and for creating identities. Now look at the woman in the middle with all of her Lulabelle pink foxes hanging off her on all sides. Next slide. So I'm going to take a side trip over to Korea for just a minute or so and think about what I observed there. Right, this is from my first trip to Korea ever last January, and you see me dressed up in costume go to a photo booth to have my picture taken with some of the other young students who were there, and I'm walking with Erin Shin, who was a colleague at Korea University. We're seeing again the K-pop festival on January 31st. Just the colors, the costumes, all there to create a space that's magical, maybe less framed by a specific fantasy than what we saw in Shanghai, but nevertheless a space of fantasy, enchantment, empowerment, female universalism. And a lot of it is centered around the interspace between the fan and the idol. Next page. So here's me in this kind of pop-up display of fantasy staging area that I encountered in the K-pop district. And the pink sort of being the dominant color there. Next slide. This is, people say you can't, you can't dance about architecture. Well, here we're making statuary about dance, right? And both of these are monuments to Psy and Gangnam Style as the breakthrough success that opened the West to K-pop. I happened to run into this Malaysian fan there, and she asked me to pose for a picture with her. I don't think she knows who I was, but it was fun to pose for a picture together that sort of symbolizes the universal bridging that K-pop fans feel toward each other. Next slide. But when we went to the shops, it was clear that they were not only a staging area for fandom, but a production site. So these are set up so that you can record the unboxing of the K-pop album you just bought and post it through social media. So they're a kind of simple production space for unboxing videos to help cross-promote the fan and the fan idol. Next slide. But the stores themselves are these multimedia spaces where there are videos displayed, there's photo booths, there's all kinds of media content to be bought, and it's all about how do we get greater access to the idol and how do we perform our fandom in relation to the idol in a ways that's legible to the outside world. Next slide. This is the subway near that one of the K-pop districts. They have fans buy advertising space to celebrate their idols, and then they put stick-up notes up with messages to each other. It almost completely overlays the picture of the idol by the end of the time the ad is running. And this is another way of performing the connection between fan and idol. Next slide. And I was fascinated by the ways cloth dolls were being used here. The cloth dolls are distinctly K-pop phenomenon, but they had all these areas where you could take pictures with your cell phone camera of your doll in some fantasy setting. So your doll gets to have fantasies too, gets to do somewhere to another enchanted world. And women in their 30s and 40s were spending afternoons dressing their dolls, taking their pictures in a way that the grooming rituals that are going on there, not anything I'd ever seen for women or adults that age before, but it was clearly part of the rituals of K-pop and idol culture. Next slide. And then you can have your picture taken in these photo booths. The thing that interested me the most was the woman in blue there is a pop idol. She wasn't actually there. She's imprinted on the photograph with me and my young guide. And we're posing for pictures together, but as if we actually were interfacing with that celebrity. So again, it's a fantasy of more intimacy with the idol. That's part of what's being staged in these spaces. Next slide. And then these are just some of the materials that we get. That's me with my G-Idol light stick. That's my guide with a pair of pajamas that connects her to one of the other fandoms and so forth. Okay, next slide. The last layer of this that I'm fascinated with is the performance of national identity as if it were a fandom, right? And that's what's happening around Han Fu cosplay in China, and particularly right now. It's been a lot of disputes about how it started, right? Some say it was a fan bottom-up thing, that people discovered the beauty of old Chinese costumes that had been prohibited under the Cultural Revolution and are being reclaimed by the current generation. But a lot of it is tied to the genre of historical drama that's very popular on Chinese television right now through things like Princesses in the Palace, which gets people interested in their own history. And now the government has tried to attach themselves to this by trying to run rental shops for costumes and photo studios at major historical sites. So these are some of the people I saw at a water town that I went to visit while I was in China. Next slide. But you see how Hanfu bleeds over into modern street fashion. She's a very stylish woman, sort of reminds me of Michelle Yeoh when I saw her walking down the street, and it was so striking. But it's clear those clothes are inspired by Hanfu and, you know, cosplay, and are being turned into high fashion. Next slide. This is me and some of the other people in our group that were going around Shanghai together, trying Hanfu at a different water town. And me dressed like the emperor, because it was basically the only male costume that they had available, certainly in my size. But you see the range of historical periods and styles. Some of those are my America-based students. Some of them are Chinese students, but we're all just having a good time dressing up together in this great staging area, this historic village that now has become a fantasy space, a kind of imaginary homeland again. Next slide. And the same thing is happening in Korea with Hanbok. This is one of the major palaces in Seoul. I was there on the first day of the year, this year, and hundreds of people showing up in historic costumes. Turns out they do it every day, but I kept thinking it had something to do with the new year, but it wasn't. It was just, this is what these palaces are like. People dress up in costumes to stage their own princess narratives with their own little princesses. Next slide. And here's some more of the way hanbok gets imposed on the cloth dolls that I was seeing in Korea. And next slide. So as we bring this down to a close, I'm not going to have an elegant close here, but I did want to turn it toward the Philippines, right? And I'm very clear that Philippines has to be part of this whole, the phenomenons I'm talking about. I have yet to go to the Philippines. I have several friends who are fan studies people from the Philippines. Karen Tongson, who comes from a long musical family in the Philippines, is my colleague at USC. Gail DeKosnik is writing some amazing stuff about fandom in the Philippines now, and I'm looking for a way to get there, to spend time with you guys, and to learn more about what fan culture looks like there. But you'll see there, among this list of countries with the most K-pop fans, Philippines are ranked number 3, just right after Indonesia and Japan. So clearly the cross-cultural, transcultural dimensions of fandom are very much part of this. Next slide. And we're also seeing if that's a connection between Philippines. Oh, it must have gotten dropped. I had a slide here that was about anime fandom in Philippines as well. So both connections between Philippines and Korea, Philippines and Japan. I still know less about how China might figure into all of that, but I'd love your observations. I can see some of them I've been reading them at the corner of my eye as I've been talking, but I want to hear your thoughts, your observations. I am still a novice learning this stuff, but you know, I think there is something here to be we should all be talking about as we think about the global shuffle, transcultural fandom, imaginary homelands, and more. So I'll turn it over to whatever happens next.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins. That was a really, really interesting, exciting, fan moment filled discussion. And thank you for the VR fandom tour of every fandom that you've been with, and every fandom cultures that you've been
Oh,
exploring.
scarcely not every, but it definitely hints into it anyway.
Yes. So thank you. And I think I'm just gonna point out some stuff that really resonated, like how femaleness, femininity, and even feminism figures in today's popular culture milieus. We now know that Dr. Jenkins is a Neverland, a pop mart evangelist, an Ultraman enthusiast, and a Ravenclaw. And of course, some things that popped out really is like what Dr. Jenkins has said. Fantasy is woven in our everyday lives, and it's now making believe. And of course, popular culture now is the thing that joins us all together. So I'm seeing lots of comments and a few questions being posted. We will now move on to the open forum. Again, just a reminder, you can send in your questions over our Zoom chat box and Q&A functionality here in our FB Live comment thread. So for the Zoom participants, you can also make use of the raise your hand button so we can address you accordingly. At this point, to further expand all the important insights from the lecture and of course our forum, I would like to introduce our session moderator. So Dr. Cherish Eileen Aguilar Brillon is an associate professor at the UP College of Mass Communication, Broadcast Communication Department. She's part of the advisory committee of DZUP 1602, the official radio station of the UP community, and has just finished her stint as the director of the UP System Padayon Public Service Office. Before going into the academe full-time, she had previous experiences in film festival organizing, production management, editing for independent film productions, audio-video production consultancy, and public relations work. Her research interests are political economy of media, gender, fandom, celebrity, and superhero studies. So she taught the, if I may say, again, much talked about celebrity studies, Taylor Swift in focus here in the Philippines, an elective that was offered last academic year. So without further ado, the Zoom floor is yours, Dr. Iris Brillon.
Thank you so much, Alison. And once again, thank you so much for sharing with us, Dr. Jenkins, no, not just your trips, no, but I think more importantly, the various ways, no, of looking at fandoms, no. So and for sharing it with us some of your work, no, not only on transcultural fandom, but also talking about pop cosmopolitanism, which I kind of mentioned last time when I also had the privilege of having this conversation with the audiences now of PACMRI. Your notions on imaginary homeland, and of course, I think you've generated so much excitement with your discussion of Pop Mart. So that's very. So I guess now you know that Philippines is.
We like
It's
pop, you like Pop
yes,
Mart too. I'm glad to see that.
yes. I think not just to maybe before we open up the floor for questions and maybe some comments and insights from the floor, just to a little bit connect it to the some of the things that I presented last time, no, and I think there were really major parallelisms, no, and one of that is really how fandom is already, well, fandom studies right now is very very complex, and it has also very much evolved, no, so you can see that from Dr. Jenkins presentations, and how studying fandom and fandom practices and fans now have also crossed geographical boundaries, no, but then I think there are also some divergences between our presentation, and some of that has to do with questions of positionalities and subjectivities, which I would like to explore a little bit later also with Dr. Jenkins, no, and then especially in an example of that is also how in the Philippines there are still a number of scholars who tends to think of fandom in a very localized space, and that's fine, and that's still very very much valid, no, but personally though, the students who are doing research in my class, as for example, they're already engaged in transcultural and transnational fan studies, no, and I think that's very interesting, and it's nice that, you know, a lot of people have been uh that we've given that glimpse now to that fandom practices has also grown so much in recent years. Um, so before we open up the floor for questions, again, I'm just going to reiterate what Alison has said, no, that you can type it via the chat group, the chat room, or maybe you can raise your hands, and then I'm sure Alison will also help me call out the names now. And even those in Facebook Live, if you're also very much interested to join in the discussion or to ask Dr. Jenkins a question, you can um, put in your comments and we'll try our best to read them. So while everyone, I guess, is busy writing their comments or maybe gathering their thoughts and insights, I, I, I have two questions for Dr. Jenkins because I'm pretty sure later I will not be able to get a word in. Uh, because people are very excited about all of the things that you shared now. But I think one of my first question is, and again tying this up also to what I've shared previously, no. So during the course of your work, Dr. Jenkins, there were already references about decolonizing fandom studies, and I kind of like that you mentioned at the end of your speech that you're very much interested in Philippine fandom, no. So it this is something that's relevant for us in the global south, and that's also what I was trying to point out during my presentation. But what are your current insights about the notion of decolonizing fandom studies, and has the Philippines figured in these discussions already? Because like what you said, we're very much passionate about fandoms. Like, um, not only are we number three in K-pop, but our top artist, according to listener preferences, is actually Taylor Swift. And then there are a lot of K-pop groups who visit the country, and even K-drama stars. So, what are your thoughts right now about like maybe notions of decolonizing fandom studies?
Well, let me start with the fact that up until this point in my career, I only published one essay that at all touched on global fandoms, with the piece I mentioned on
Yes.
pop cosmopolitanism, because I've always felt as an American that I was most useful writing about my own culture, which I know better than I know anyone else's culture. But I've come to realize that as I become a senior statesman in the field, it's important that I amplify the voices and make them more visible here and help provide what I can to help learn from those people in various parts of the Asia and other parts of the world, that what's going on there. And I need to learn. So I'm going out of my world more and more to learn what's going on in yours and to try to create a space where I can help support that research as an ally and as an amplifier, but not as someone usurping it. And so I start, when I do something like the talk here, I'm very careful to position myself as an ignorant Westerner who's still got a lot to learn, basically. But I do think I can bring some questions and observations that can contribute to the conversation there. But my presence there makes the work other people are doing more visible. And that's my main reason for doing it. We hosted the Global Fandom Jamboree discussion series on my blog a couple of years ago. I've taken my blog and now it's got a global editorial board of young early career scholars from all different parts of the world who are, and a lot of what's being published are accounts that are local accounts in their own countries of what fandom looks like. And so at this stage in my career, this is where my passion lies. I am also, as I said, writing this book that consolidates what I see fandom studies having become in the last 30 years into something that's a series of handbooks for people to get started. And we're going to be welcoming proposals for translating those into various languages once we get them out. But so that's where I come at this, right? I think, though, it is absurd to think of it purely as one directional cultural imperialism today,
That's true.
given the
Yes.
global shuffle and circulation that's going on, given the grassroots innovation that's taking place, given the way American fans are attracted to Asian pop culture. this time in teaching my fandom studies PhD seminar, the majority of students wrote about K-pop, regardless of their ethnicity or national origins. And up to now, it's been Western science fiction that most captured their attention.
true.
There's been a flip to where it's almost about half my students this time around were Asian and Asian American women, and they were drawn to Asian forms of pop culture, not Western forms of pop culture to write about for my class. And so I'm getting quite an education through that.
If you want, everyone here attending this talk now would, maybe if you have a free time and visit the country, we can walk you through the various fan practices.
I really want to do
yeah.
that. And we've been discussing it with various organizations and universities there, maybe pooling the money together so that it would be possible. As long as as long as I break even, that's all I'm looking for, right? I'm not trying to profit off of things there. I just want to get there, and I can't afford to go. And so if we figure something out, I'm there. I can't do it this summer, but the following summer, I'm publicly committing to doing it if the money's in place. And it's just, can we work together to find the resources to get me there and let me do some teaching there or whatever. But we'll also spend time going out with your students and seeing things.
Yeah. Because I just realized, like, for example, anime showcase events about animes and cosplays, they really do happen here on like a monthly basis, and sometimes even on a weekly basis almost in our malls. So malls is like a very, it's one of the spaces now where fandom practices typically happens in the country. And I think that's very, very interesting because you'll find that we also do have a very, very yeah. So
And that's not the
hopefully,
experience of fans in the US. Our malls are not very receptive to us. They freak out if they see more than one or two people wearing costumes in the mall at a time, let alone hosting things. I mean, we have to go to cons, and cons are less frequent. And
that's true. And you have major cons. Here
we
we
do have
have
some
them
major
on
cons, and our
Yeah.
cons are a bit different from what I'm seeing
Yes.
in China, but
Mhm.
I think I trade the big cons for a weekend only world where literally every weekend or even every
Yes.
day for some of these high schoolers I've met in Shanghai show up and enjoy fandom as a subculture,
That's true.
the way
That's true.
skateboarders are a subculture or something.
Just to also pick up a little bit of that before we turn to some of the questions. Were there ever, like, for example, did you encounter any criticisms or about, like, for example, you as a scholar from the global north studying pop cultures from the global south? Were there some criticisms about it?
Well,
Or
there's, we're still dealing with the baggage of ideas of cultural imperialism for some older scholars, for some more hardcore Marxist scholars and so forth. And I respect that. I understand where that's coming from. But people I've encountered have been so appreciative that I'm there, that I'm listening, that I'm learning, and that I'm trying to build something that creates opportunities for students, that I don't feel like I've been at all attacked or besieged, quite the opposite. And I get an audience when I go to China say, it's so much bigger than what I would get speaking in the US, that people are hungry for these discussions, and I'm happy to be part of them.
Okay. We are now going to go into the chat room. I think there are now a lot of questions and maybe insights. I'll read them. I'll try to read them all. So the first one is from Eunice Braga. His well, Eunice has a question. So historically, transformative fandom has been used as a term for fan work that plays with canon in media fandom. Where is fan studies research at when it comes to learning about how being in fandom inspires transformation in people and studying what they create in their lives as a result? And I think this is beyond fan work.
No, this is important.
Yeah.
This is what interests me, right? This is what interests me about the civic imagination work we have been doing.
true.
We're seeing people borrow and appropriate and remix
Yes.
content from pop culture and turn into a vernacular through which to speak to the public sphere. We're seeing the
That's true.
formation of fan publics, we're seeing the emergence of fan activism, and we're seeing it play ever more visible roles in the political process
That's
in
true.
the
Yeah.
US, right? So if you're paying attention to the current presidential campaign in America, I'm working with a group called the Schlepp Foundation, which was started by Sarah Silverman, the
Sarah
comedian.
Silverman, yeah.
Yes, and they do a lot of interesting work bridging pop culture as a way of getting the attention of young voters. You know, right now Harris has most of the women sewn up, but young men are either going to sit this out or thinking about voting for Trump, and we're trying to bring them into the process more. So we did a Heroes for Harris rally on Zoom just a couple of weeks ago, where we had Mark Ruffalo, who plays the Incredible Hulk. We had, Mandy Patinkin, who was in The
Yeah.
Princess Bride. We had
Mhm.
the actor Sean Austin, who played in Sam G and the Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
12 different showrunners, actors, and it was billed as a Comic-Con for Kamala. And we had about a 4-hour session. We raised $40,000 to support the campaign. There was one more recently than that was run by Linda Carter that brought
Oh,
most
yeah.
of the women in, and it raised even more money. But this is very much now an established part of it. There are multiple Zoom rallies coming up with women from Star Trek, the actresses from Star Trek appearing together in various cities, hosting live events for fans to come, and the actresses are their attraction, but there's space to discuss the campaign, to get recruited in to work on the campaign. And this is a way of transforming the society. So too is the use of the three-finger salute from Hunger Games,
Yes, exactly.
Thailand, right?
In
By Stephen
Thailand,
Chow.
yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Or the use of Can You Hear the
Even
People
in Brunei, I
Singing
think
in
they,
Hong
yeah,
Kong, right? And
yeah.
so we're looking all over. We're seeing globally transformative fandom is paving the way for fans
That's
to
true.
transform society.
That's
And
true.
that's one of the books that I mentioned, the short books that we're publishing is specifically about this question of fan activism. Another is more broadly about public sphere theory and how fandom relates to publics. So we got 2 books coming out in this series. It'll be dropping periodically over the next 2 years that will actually directly address that question.
Just to also a little bit talk about transformative fandom, but in the context of the Philippine setting, some of my current works right now also deals with transformative fandom. One of which has to do with how fans, and this is regardless of fan affiliation or celebrity or show affiliation, but they have been very instrumental in helping fight disinformation. The country is a petri dish for disinformation campaign. So fans have started doing that, and using actually fan practices like using fan cams, hashtags, or hijacking hashtags actually. Then I've also tried exploring now how, for example, Filipino Swifties have used Taylor Swift's iconography to help in the campaign last presidential elections. So there's also that, and now I'm working also with how a local superhero, Darna, has become a rallying voice for Filipino queer women, because for the longest time they have not been represented well. So I mean, this is also not just something that's happening in other countries, but it's also just to also maybe if you need, you're interested in that. The
Yeah, I
Philippines also
definitely
has
want to
been
know more,
doing
and if you've got articles,
a lot
please
that,
send
yeah.
them. But no, I think this is what we're seeing everywhere we look. Whenever we find I can actually engage with fan scholars from other countries. We're seeing that
Yes.
everywhere pop culture is become a central resource of the civic
That's
imagination.
true.
And what we mean by the civic imagination, civics refers to the relation of members of a community to each other, not necessarily to the governance structure, the political structure, which means it's applicable for places like China in a
Yeah.
way some of the other language we might use is not. But in the imagination, we start from the premise before you can change the world, you have to imagine what a better world looks like. You have
That's
to
true.
imagine yourself as an agent capable of making change. You have to imagine the connections between you and other members of your community. You have to imagine a process of change that yields results. You have to imagine and align yourself with the perspectives of people different from yourself. For those groups that have been most marginalized and oppressed, they may have to imagine freedom, democracy, respect before they've directly experienced it in their lives in order to be motivated to fight for it. And then
That's
finally, the physical space is often charged with those imaginations. And that
That's true.
constantly brings the politics back into the everyday life. That it's not, politics is not in the civic
Divorce. Yeah.
imagination model, not a special event every 4
Yes.
years when you vote. It's a lifestyle
That's
that
true.
you live in relation to the political. You live in relation to sustainability or gender rights or queer rights or whatever the issues that are most touching your life. And fandom makes all of those things possible. Fandom has a really powerful model for how we go from the imagination to action, to
That's
agency.
true.
And that's what we're seeing in the work we've been doing on the civic imagination. And we are actively looking for case studies around the world. We did the book Pop Culture and the Civic Imagination, my research team and I, and now we're going to do another one. That book was about 30 essays, about 25 of them were US-based, 5 or 6 were internationally based. We want to flip that scale. We wanted this next book to be international cases of the civic imagination. So if there's writers in the Philippines, maybe you're the right one who would like to write about what's happening there. We are going to be reaching out soon to try to put together a proposal for such a book.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I think now there are a number of Filipino scholars who are also very active in talking about fan citizenships and fan civic imagination. So yes, hopefully we'll get a spot somewhere there, just so we can introduce also Filipino fandom to the world. Okay, some more, Dr. Jenkins, some more from the chat box. Oh yes, we'll introduce you. When you go here, we'll introduce you to the Aldab titas and lolas. They will really blow your mind. I mean,
I can only hope.
I
I
think the
love
word
all that stuff.
dilulu was is something that came from some of these subcultures, no. And then there is mall culture according to Allison, and fan culture is equals to Philippine fandom. So this is what we were talking about earlier about the malls. First question from the Q&A box. What is the role of fandom in engendering new media literacy? So there's a question on media literacies and fandom.
All right, so I started exploring this question almost 20 years ago when MacArthur Foundation asked me to write a white paper on new media literacies that was grounded in what we knew about informal learning in gaming and in fandom. And we developed a platform based on that was very successful. You know, as I have lots of followers all over the world who've been using the new media literacy curriculum we did. And we did a book called Reading in a Participatory Culture that was merged together some ideas from fandom studies with ideas from literary scholarship to think about how we teach classic novels. In the American case, it was Herman Melville's Moby Dick differently if we take on remix culture as part of the world that our students live in. And I write about in that book Herman Melville as a fan of whaling cultures, right? And how the kinds of behaviors he has in his book reflect what we would now see as fandom, right? And in some ways he's talking about how do stories get rewritten? What if we imagine King George, the story of George and the Dragon is really a story about whaling at one point. So there's a lot that goes on there that we've explored. And we've worked with researchers and teachers, museums all across the US in particular, helping them get school, figure out how to make this work. And there are any number of success stories that have come out of that. It's been hard to sustain. It's been hard to get the attention of top-level educators in the US, where, local teachers, yes. Local teachers innovating, easy. Making it a district-wide thing or a statewide thing, we've had no successes at that level, leave aside national level. And it's been difficult because so many educators and librarians are suspicious of pop culture, right? And there are lots of fans who are librarians, and the librarians are our real heroes in the struggles for media literacy. But somehow fans and librarians together hasn't quite gelled as much as I thought it might have 20 years ago. And so it's less central to my own work now than it was then, but I have trained a generation of educators, both teachers and education researchers, who are carrying on that work. And it's still ongoing, particularly games-based learning research. UC Mimi Ito's crew at UC Riverside, Kurt Squire, Constance Steinkuhler. There are lots of folks who come out of that intersection between my team and theirs that are doing this work.
And just relating to that, even in the Philippines, I think notions of media literacy has not yet really fully touched on some of the things that you talked about, because it really remains within the discussion, still really remains within the domain of access to technology, and also, like, for example, very historical also approach to talking about media literacy. So not really going into possibilities of maybe fans or gameplays or any of those things. So there's still also a lot of work to be done on that end. Yeah.
And I often say that the earliest media literacy work was about media consumption, critical consumption. And then we broadened it out to critical production as we gave kids access to cameras to make their media. And now what the struggle is around critical participation, right? And that's partially fans, part of that, but so is just everyday social media, right? We are all part of a participatory relations with media, but it's not just about a separation of consumption and production. We're making, when we post on Facebook, we are making media, we're circulating media, we're consuming media, and it's the blurring of the boundaries between those with notions of what it is to live in a community. That is where media literacy needs to be focused. And I think Fandom gives us some really good tools for thinking about all of those questions.
Okay, and this is another question, Dr. Jenkins. In the classes I handle, I employ political cosplay as alternative learning strategy. I refer to political cosplays as pop informed but social in content. So for instance, we feature Storm of X-Men as climate activist. In her act, she would summon the Arctic wind, but Desert Storm will come instead, depicting the extent of global climate change that the mistress of the elements herself cannot control anymore. The same idea when we alternatively represent Magneto, also of X-Men, as an advocate of the nationalization of the steel industry. What are your thoughts about these initiatives and variations in cosplays as a communicative act? Before you answer, Dr. Jenkins, hello to my fellow X-Men fan. I have a fellow X-Men fan here. Let me know who you are. And we can work on something. Yes, Dr. Jenkins.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's good to hear about that. And I'd love to sit down and talk with you when and if I get to Philippines. We write in, I think it's in Pop Culture and the Civic Imagination, about this guy in New York City who's Sikh. And he dresses like Captain America, but wearing a turban. And he goes out on the streets of New York, stops people coming up and out of the subway. Initially, he was protesting the See Something, Say Something campaign, where you were supposed to report anyone suspicious on the subway. And the result was not to catch very many terrorists, but it did catch significant number of brown people carrying backpacks on the New York subway. So we're safe from that. And he was just calling attention to that. He's an American, he's Sikh, He's not Muslim, but he wears a turban, and he wanted to use that as a provocation to think about what does a hero look like? What makes him look suspicious? The significant number of people, and to do outreach and conversations around the questions of religious and ethnic identity in America. I similarly, when I went to the Occupy Wall Street protest in New York City maybe a decade ago, I was greeted by a busload of zombies who had been going to a local horror convention and were rerouted there and were passing out brochures and getting people's attention and posing for pictures and zombie costumes on the streets of New York. So that was my first introduction, this idea that cosplay could become activism. Since then, I've seen many, many good examples of it. Superhero cosplay in particular lends itself to this particularly well. We saw during the pandemic lots of use of superhero imagery to think about emergency workers in the US, the first responders, so forth, and first responder organizations were using superheroes and sort of trying to encourage men in particular to wear masks because their machismo wouldn't let them wear a mask, but they were saying superheroes wear masks. It's interesting, I'm doing some historical research. I discovered that during the Spanish influenza epidemic in the US in the early 20th century, they sold men on wearing masks by saying cowboys wear masks. And specifically, they became William S. Hart's, who was then the biggest Western star, was involved in promoting the wearing of masks then. So the same problem, masculinity not ready to accept wearing masks and wrapping pop culture around it to spread health information. So yeah, I absolutely think this is part of the solution, and it's part of what we mean by civic imagination. We've been trying to track some of this. I was not aware of your situation there, but it doesn't surprise me. I'm seeing it elsewhere around the world and would love to know more about it.
Okay. Another question comes from Dr. Data Canlas. Okay, so this is addressed for the both of us. How can fan studies and fandoms account for the political, economic dimensions of this phenomenon, especially with the reach of China and on a larger scale, Southeast Asian countries, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's a space where we should be able to find common ground. There are lots of questions I need answers to that probably political economy has some already. And I am just not as deeply enmeshed in the political economy world as I should to get the answers that I need. I think it's wrong that we've stayed at loggerheads with each other, cultural studies, political economy,
true.
much as
That's
has
true. Yeah.
happened. Because I think you need a sense of agency and participation to account for the new forms of political economy. And I need some notions of power and industry to account for the way fandom is operating in a world where the boundaries are starting to break down between producers and consumers. I think we have a lot to learn from each other. And
That's true.
I'm trying to get at some of those answers in the series of books I'm doing now, but it will not be sufficient. I can tell you right there, I'm sure I'm going to get creamed by political economists who are not always the most generous of people, but
I just okay. I sometimes I do have to agree with you on that, but yeah. Although I guess my maybe a little contribution to this is especially coming from the polyecon of the Philippine media industry, but then also um I think it's the observation that nowadays fans, as for example, are really using notions of power and consumption in order, for example, to maybe try and convince the celebrities or the shows that they are supporting to maybe make a stand on certain things and on certain issues. That's some of my initial observations as someone who is also a fan of local
yes.
shows. But then also, I think on a global scale, as for example, Chinese fans, I am very, very curious. I'm not sure if you've encountered this during your visit, but like the the way that, for example, Chinese fans, they do give gifts and spend so much on their idols in the notion of like giving them luxury
Yes,
items.
I
I'm
hear a
not sure
lot
though.
about
Yeah,
this.
so that's also I'm in a Thai GL community right now, and I think and there is a and there is a kind of a pressure, for example, for Filipinos to maybe outperform um, some of the expressions of fandom of maybe Asian countries, no, who really loves giving gifts, but we are a third world country with with very little
Yeah.
income, and our salary is really so bad, and so that expression is very very different than when, for example, we're talking about Chinese and maybe Koreans who love giving gifts to their idols.
No, and I'm torn about all of this, right? I'm
Yeah. Hmm.
horrified by some of the fan economy stuff that I'm learning
I
in
know.
adult culture, because I come from American fan culture is, you know, we fans do not profit off of other fans, or that's the ethics the fandom has been for 40 years. Sometimes it doesn't work out in practice, but there's a sort of sense of at least the basis of critiquing other fans who are profiting off of fans. In effect, there is a kind of fan socialism in the US and a fan capitalism in China. And I
Yes.
find that
Actually,
really
yes.
very curious that
That's
it's
true.
developed that way. But I also try not to slap about fans. It's not my place to be criticizing fans. I try to help articulate why they choose to do what they do,
Yeah.
as any good ethnographer does, but I don't see critique as the driving force of my work. My work is shaped by documentation and advocacy and intervention. I definitely pass through a phase of critique, but I'm not centrally about critique. So, and it's certainly not my place to critique the behavior of fans in China or Philippines or any other place in the world from an American white male, a Western perspective, right? That's not what I'm trying to do. So I would rather be slapped because I'm not critiquing people across those axes than to be slapped because I'm butting in and critiquing people whose realities and experience I can't fully understand because I'm not of those worlds. So I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to amplify, I'm trying to explain as best I can to other groups what I think are going on, but I'm trying not to primarily define my identity in terms of critique. And that's one of the things that has historically set me apart from political economists, because
Yeah,
their number
that's
one
right.
impulse is critique.
Yeah.
And I think of academic work as having a circle that starts with documentation. We've got to identify what is happening. Then there is a space of critique for sure. Then there is a space of advocacy where we identify what alternatives look like, what we think would be a better way of handling it, and we publicize them. And then we roll up our sleeves and work on the ground with other groups to see if we can change things in the direction we think we should be going. To me, if you end at critique, it's a case of arrested development, right?
Yeah.
You've stopped. You haven't completed that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And to have activism, you've got to move beyond critique to advocacy and to
And yeah.
intervention. That's what activism is. Critique by itself isn't any more
Yes,
active
yes,
than
true.
any other scholarship.
Mhm. And I think really it's time that political economists and yeah, cultural studies, especially those fandom studies, start talking because there are, I think, problems that can be solved when these two people, as long as they're open to ideas and trying to maybe compromise no on some of these ideologies, they can actually try and make fandom really work towards a more well political and economic
Yes.
dimension. That's true. Okay, we have two remaining questions. I'm sorry, we'll just entertain two remaining questions. And uh, that this one belongs to Chino. So you know, Dr. Jenkins, is there a way to rethink how we see fandoms, where instead of the fans exploring the media content and narratives, The fans are exploring their own stories through their exposure through media contents. In essence, the fans are at the center instead of the media content idols because they are knowing more about themselves in the process.
Yeah, I think this is where we want to move. I'm not sure I've seen someone who's totally succeeded in doing what you're describing. Maybe you're the person to do it, in which case I will welcome it into my world. What I would say is that, what was I about to say? I had something in my head and it just popped out. I will say that, that definitely we use pop culture as the means of connecting with other people so that we can tell our own stories. That is sometimes hard with the absence of that intermediary stuff to build those connections strong enough that we actually stop and listen to each other's stories, right? There are definitely plenty of great projects in participatory culture that are capturing people's stories and sharing them, right? And podcasting being a great space for that, but which I'm also very invested in. But Fandom achieves this for young people who may be afraid to tell their own stories in some cases, who want some way of connecting with other people. But telling their stories through pop culture is a way of sharing those stories. So it's a false alternative. I get very frustrated by people who want to use the term parasocial to talk about,
Yes,
right?
yes, I agree.
Because
That's also
that's a
something
term
I
from
talked
mass
about last time.
media,
Yes.
one directional
Thank you for
communication
saying that. Yes.
system. When I am in a fandom, I don't have an imaginary relationship
Yes.
with a fictional character. I have a real relationship with
Relationship.
friends, that the fictional character is a vehicle for allowing us to connect with each other. And in some cases now, I have real relationships with media producers
That's true.
facilitated
Yeah.
fandom as well. So to describe that as parasocial is to misunderstand either fandom or parasocial or social, probably both.
That's true. And it's a good thing you also pointed that out because I think that's also one of my frustrations doing fandom studies in the Philippines because people are still stuck within the idea of fans having parasocial relationships with their celebrities, but it's really not about that anymore. Um, I don't know though, Chino, if you've already explored notions of self-insert in fan fictions. Maybe that's also something where the celebrity or the show is the focus and what gets the central focus in the story are the fans themselves. Maybe you can find something there also in notions of self-inserts, fan fictions, and even fan art. A lot of that also is happening now. Okay, last questions. Although this is something that maybe Dr. Jenkins has already sort of addressed, but maybe he can also elaborate further. There is now a culture of binging shows, and I think this is brought about by the Netflix dropping episodes all at once, no? And being up to date immediately and thus creating a sort of deadline in consuming things. What are your insights on this fast-paced form of participation impacting fandom and the impact it has on people's focus and interest spans? This is from Jeremy Sanchez.
Well, that's a very interesting way of framing the question, because I often point out that young people today are attacked because they have such limited attention spans and they only want to watch small snippets of things. Then what do we do with binge watching where people watch 10 hours back to back, or video game play where we play 20 hours back to back? There seems to be a lot of that language is framed around the idea that what young people pay attention to is just inappropriate from an adult perspective. And they're going to be slammed whether they pay too little attention, too short of attention, too long of an attention, too much attention. It's a way of slapping, young people for not consuming the right things. So I love binging myself. I'm totally a binge watcher. I'd rather wait till the season's over and then watch it all in a weekend than to sort of have a small one episode a week. So 1970, right? And I want to have this ability to really follow these complex narratives where the parts are woven together quickly and over time. I just came from seeing the new movie Saturday Night, which is about the staging of the first episode of Saturday Night Live. And what I want to do next is watch that first episode because the movie ends as that comes on. And so I'm creating my own binge by following the media. And I have access to the media to be able to do that now in a way that when Saturday Night Live first went on the air, I couldn't possibly have done that, right? I couldn't, when people started talking about Saturday Night Live, we couldn't go back and see those original episodes or
That's
any.
true. Mhm.
So I like the mode where we're at right now and being able to access media from all over the world and watch it in whatever time frame makes sense
They-
to us.
Mhm.
It is hard sometimes to keep up with the conversations. I sometimes have to blah, blah, blah. Don't tell me, no spoilers, my way through life, but I like the freedom that it gives me to drill where I want to drill and to spend the time that I want to spend. And I certainly do not feel guilty binge watching. It's, I don't think it's about a problem of attention management. I think it's about using the technology to access the media we want to see, when we want to see it, where we want to see it, and managing our attention in relation to it in the context of the life situation we're in. And if I was a high school student, I probably would have more time to binge watch and would probably be doing so given what I was in high school. Right now, I watch tons of media, but not with as much freedom as I would if I was an adolescent who could watch from when I get home from school to late in the evening.
Very interestingly, that's also something that I mentioned in one of my discussions in class when I told them that I know that currently people are thinking that we have short attention span, or like the young people have short attention span. But and then I told them, but maybe that's not entirely true at all, because people, especially young ones, they can binge watch
Yes.
episodes. Yes, so it means the things that they watch are holding their attention, and they're paying attention. So it kind of also is a contradiction, I guess, to the observation that young people have very short attention span because they are really fit for binge watching. This may be something that we've recently just developed as a skill, especially for people like us who got used to maybe waiting a week for all of the episode for you to watch an episode of a series. So it's a very complex discussion, I guess. And I like Dr. Jenkins' point when he talked about it gives you the freedom to maybe watch it on your own terms and watch it anytime that you want, and you don't have to like stay up late, or because yeah, you can always go to it and then watch it continuously, or watch it according to how it satisfies your psychological emotional needs. So that's also very interesting when we talk about audience studies, no, from the part of the audience. Okay, I guess that's all the time that we have for now. I can see that people are very much engaged in the discussion, and they do have a lot of other comments in the chat box, which I hope Dr. Jenkins is also able to catch up on.
I've been scanning through it. Yes. It's 8 p.m. here, so I'm going to have to bail. Sure.
Yes.
But, what I would say though, is if you have questions that haven't been addressed, drop me an email. My email address is hjenkins@usc.edu. And also, if you have students there who would like to be part of our research network, send them my way and we'll get you signed up and invite you to participate.
Okay, that's, I guess, a very, very fruitful discussion, because we've also gotten into maybe doing networking and linkages with Dr. Jenkins now, so that we'll have more Filipino fandom scholars who can maybe talk about our own culture here, our own fandom culture,
And
and
I'm so eager to
subcultures.
learn from you guys, so please.
And maybe we're also looking forward to maybe you visiting us soon, if we can
I
work
really hope we
something
can
out
figure this
with
out.
the help also of PACMRI. Thank you so much. And I'll turn over the floor now to Allison for the closing remarks or whatever. Thank you,
All
Dr.
right.
Jenkins.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all those, of course, questions, comments, and of course, our utmost appreciation to Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Brillon, who gave their time and efforts to provide, of course, detailed answers and, of course, their relevant dialogues. I'm sure we all learned so much from them. So, for all the questions, again, which are unaddressed or are still in the process of creation, we'll take note of them and address them offline. Or, of course, please feel free to send them to our Facebook, official Facebook page, or join our Facebook group. So let's start an open and knowledge sharing space. So before we formally come to a close, we would like to take this time to properly show our gratitude to our esteemed speaker and session moderator today through presenting the certificates of appreciation. So the certificate reads, the Philippine Association for Communication and Media Research, Inc. awards this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Brillon in recognition of their valuable time and expertise as resource speaker and session moderator for the masterclass titled Aca-Fan Conversations, Fandom Scholarship, In-Betweens and Beyond. This live event is held online and is part of the PACMRI 2024 Masterclass Series, given this 4th day of October 2024, signed by the President of PACMRI, Professor Maria Rosel S. San Pascual, and of course, the Director for Research of PACMRI, Assistant Professor Noel Sajid Murad. All right. So again, our sincerest
Thank you.
gratitude to Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Brillon. And to formally close this masterclass session, I would like to give the Zoom floor to our dedicated Director for Research, Assistant Professor Noel Sajid Murad.
Thank you very much, Allison, and Dr. Iris. It has been such a privilege to have this masterclass with Dr. Henry Jenkins. It is not very often that one can say they have finally met the ultimate fan scholar himself, who they continue to cite in their popular culture research papers, conference presentations, book chapters, and journal articles. Our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Jenkins for accepting our invitation as a speaker. It feels like only yesterday that I met Dr. Henry in a Thai restaurant wearing a Squid Game pink shirt after a special session on the Hallyu Wave at the 74th International Communication Association Conference, which was held at the Gold Coast last June 2024. So thank you very much, Doc Lia Uitioko, for connecting us. My fanboy heart is still so full, to be honest. And I sincerely hope that the audience too has picked up on many insights today that will inspire and drive their research interests on popular culture, transformative fandoms, civic imaginations, the political economy of media, and of course, surface the dialogues between Global North and Global South. I'd also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge our institutional partners who are present with us today. Angeles University Foundation, Biliran Province State University Department of Communication, Cagayan State University Caraig Campus, Communicators Pillars, National University Clark, Immaculate Conception 1 College of Arts and Technology, Lyceum of the Philippines University Cavite, National University Fairview, Our Lady of Fatima University, and of course our newest partner, De La Salle University Manila. So for those of you who still aren't members, we hope you can consider joining us as we have many more master classes and many more research activities that you can co-organize with us, just like our partners from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, Communication 10 GE Cluster, as well as De La Salle University, Manila. Moreover, we'd like to invite everyone to this year's National Communication Research Conference, which will be held in De La Salle University, Manila, from November 22 to 23, 2024, with the theme Blueprints and Imprints, the UN Sustainable Development Goals in Communication and Media Research. I'd just like to quote Dr. Henry, fandom is born out of fascination and some frustration. If you weren't fascinated, you wouldn't continue to engage as a fan. If you weren't frustrated, you often wouldn't continue to rewrite and reinvent. So thank you all very much for sharing your Friday morning with us today. We hope you too have been truly fascinated by the many insights that was shared by Dr. Iris and Dr. Jenkins, and hopefully our frustrations may lead to reimaginations of a more just and equitable society for those living in the margins of society. So we look forward to having you in our PACMRI Masterclass next week on the culture-centered approach to communication and media studies. Maraming salamat po, everyone. Back to you, Allison.
Thank you so much, Assistant Professor Murad. So, of course, I'd like to ask all the Zoom participants to please stay in the meeting room for a quick photo op together with, of course, Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Brillon. So, who'll take the picture for us? So,
I can
just a
take.
quick snapshot. Okay, all
Yeah.
right. So, per panel again.
Yes. So,
Okay.
Chino, maybe we can remove the slide muna. Yes. Okay. So, I'll start with panel 1. So everybody with the biggest and brightest smiles. Ready? 1, 2, 3. If you want to put a finger heart, let's do that. 1, 2, 3. For panel 3. 1, 2. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you all for participating. Of course, thank you to the PACMRI for organizing and hosting events
Thank you.
that
Thank
are
you.
truly relevant as we all tread the path to learning and pedagogy together. Again, thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you, Dr. Brillon. So this has been Allison Atis. Take care, stay safe, and have a good one.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you, Dr. Iris.
Thank you, Doc Jenkins.
Ingat, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, UPLB.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Chino.
much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
po. Thank you, everyone.